afternoon, all. It's a pleasure to be present in a conference arranged by any regional council. And especially in Calcutta, I'm more happy because Mr. Rahul Roy was the vice president when I happened to be the president. And therefore, I think it's a great pleasure for me to be present with you. I must thank the chairman, Eastern India Regional Council, and all the office bearers for inviting me all the way over here. From morning, I have heard about 2 or 3 sessions, and when I was going through the session, I found that out of the entire conference, audit, this is the only session. In a way, it's a good thing. It indicates the process through which the profession is passing. The name is Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, but while the name is accounting, we emphasize more on auditing. While we emphasize on auditing, the recent trend is that we want to do everything else other than auditing. Pardon me, I know that I am speaking in a conference of chartered accountants, but having been the past president, I can take it as an in-house speech rather than a speech given by an outsider to various authorities. And therefore, at some places, if you find some comments to be more realistic and they touch your heart, I'll be more happy for that. Because when you attend a conference, I think the idea is not to get information. The idea is to get the thought process. All of you know how to approach to Google. All of you are members of WhatsApp University. So you get lots of messages, you get lots of information. So I think I'm not here for that. I'll be here to share with you some thoughts on the subject allotted to me. And I think, therefore, let me come to that subject straight away. Most of the people start by having a PPT. And I think that's one of the risk management that the organizers do. They normally request the person who is going to speak to make a PPT presentation so that at least they know that the person has been prepared and this is what he will speak about. But I think being a past president, I took the liberty of telling the chairman that, sorry, I won't have a PPT, but I'll make something which is my thought process on the subject. So pardon me that I don't have the PPT, but I'll broadly divide the subject into about 5 or 6 parts. Let me begin with that. First is, as the title catches, the appointment process of the auditors. Secondly, the audit report that we give. Thirdly, the various sections of the audit report. Next, all of us who do the audit, that is firms who do the audit, and as individuals, when we constitute the firm, as individuals, what is it that we need to do and what is it that we can do? I think that's the whole process in which I'll try to cover my subject. In the process, there'll be some thoughts, there's some questions, some issues on which I have no answer, so I leave it to all of you to find out the answers. Secondly, I was told in the morning that there are registrations of 2,000. The normal hall arrangements are so good that with the light you can't make out how many people are sitting there, and one can therefore easily presume that there is a large number of gatherings sitting and be happy about it. The only request I would have for all of you is presume that you are going to do audit. Because in any session, like the earlier session was startup. Now, if you attend a session of startup by presuming that I am going to be an auditor, then I think half the job is lost. Because you keep on thinking that you are an auditor, you are a tax consultant, but you also want to be a startup. I think that is what takes us away from the main job of thinking of what I wish to do. And therefore, if you are attending a session on audit, I would request you, whether you are actually doing audit or not is another matter. But presume that you are going to do audit. You are really interested in knowing what happens in this subject so that the process starts reaching your mind. Because the first prerequisite for any conference is I can always register wherever I want. I can get the CPE credit, that is courtesy the institute. But when I attend a session, I must attend it with the objective that I wish to know what is something new in this area. Can I know something which I do not know? And can I know something which I should know? I think that's the first point. So my first request is that presume that you're going to do audit, and then this will make a lot of difference to you when we end the session, maybe about 30 minutes from now. The subject of appointment of auditors is always very touchy. The whole profession is normally divided into two parts. Some people say that no, the shareholder democracy must prevail and the shareholders must appoint the auditors. There are a large number of people who believe otherwise. Just as in any society, there are many people who are wise, but there are some who are otherwise. So you can think of on which category all of us fit into, but let's look at the subject in a logical, understanding manner. Let's take a different types of audits, what happens and what can happen. In case of corporates, is the shareholders' democracy. Normally through the management, it gets decided and X or Y is appointed as an auditor. In case of government companies, it's the CAG panel. So the CAG panel will decide the audit firm based on the numbering, marks, etc. And the auditors are appointed. In case of banks, and especially the circular issued about 2 years ago, when the rotation of audit is going to happen every 3 years, and there are a good number of conditions within that circular. I won't repeat the conditions per se, but let's look at the matter per se. For private sector audit, normally it's only the central statutory auditors who will do the audit. There is no concept of a branch audit straight away because the centralized software system enables the central auditors to do the entire audit sitting at one place or maybe traveling at 10 different places. In public sector banks, this position is not yet reached, and therefore the bank branch audit concept still continues. And the profession at large, I think, envisages that this system should continue forever. But please mark the words which are stated in the morning, and I repeat that the moment the public sector banks also shift to the entire system which is adopted by the private sector banks, this system may become in danger zone. So I think that's the first point that all of us must keep in mind. Insurance companies, again, the private sector insurance companies, the audits can be done from sitting from the central office, maybe visiting few divisions and branches. But public sector insurance companies, there are still divisional auditors and branch auditors. What is the system which prevails in this? Let's take banks and insurance companies. I'm sure most of you must have done bank audit, branch audit, insurance company, division audit, etc. Whenever I talk to people who are doing the central statutory audit, normally they say that the branch auditors are not doing it properly. We don't get proper reports. We don't get this and that. In number of discussions they would have. And when you talk to the branch auditors, that means people who are doing branch audit, they will say, we do such a good thing, we report, but we never understand how it is dealt with by the main auditors. I think this is our first problem, and we have to find a solution for this. There has to be a mechanism in which the central statutory auditors of banks and insurance companies should write or communicate to the auditors who are doing the branch audit where they feel that the audit is not done properly. Unfortunately, we don't have a formal mechanism of doing these things. Unless this mechanism is started, I envisage that this system is in danger of losing for the profession. Simply because not only the profession but the outside banking system and the insurance people also believe that this is not adding value to their ultimate job. So as a profession, either starting from the institute or from all of us forcing the institute to do it, there has to be a mechanism by which those who are doing the central statutory audit of a bank or an insurance company, when they feel that the job is not properly done, they should communicate this to the branch auditors who have not done properly as per their understanding, communicate to them what improvement they should make so that your belief that they are not doing it properly is either confirmed or is dismantled. Because you can't keep on believing that somebody else is not doing the job but still depend upon that person to continue to do your job. And when I say you or me, it's interchangeable. It's not you or me, it's the profession. So I think this is one area which needs a substantial improvement. Concurrent audit of bank is another area which is less said the better. The appointments are done by the banks. the contents of the concurrent audit are so engrossed that it even says you have to see whether the watchman is standing properly, whether the gun is facing outside or inside, whether the cashier is opening the door properly or not. And all of us who are doing concurrent audit accept the appointment of concurrent auditor, and we keep on reporting on that. I think just the earlier session we are talking about what can be done. I think this is the time where we can do something. Why can't the profession stand up and say, look, these kind of appointments are completely ultra-vires the job of the nature for which we are appointed? Somewhere either at the top or starting from the bottom, the system has to change. If the system is not changing itself, we must have the courage of conviction to communicate to those who matter that this system needs a change. If we don't do that, we are the people who are going to suffer. I think those who keep quiet when there are problems suffer more as compared to those who at least make noise and make it communicate to those who matter. Broadly in the society, there are two types of people. Those who mind, they do not matter. And there are some who mind, they do not matter. And there are some who matter, but they do not mind. Luckily, a CA profession is something which can be on both sides, and therefore we have to ensure that when the systems are not proper, we must be able to stand up to that and do the job. The question at the back of the mind is, whatever are the issues, would they change because the appointing authority changes? With great respect, I don't feel that way. It can give a psychological relief, but by itself, that's not going to change the situation. And that's where I shift to my next topic about audit reporting and issues arising out of audit reporting. The audit that we report, firstly, there is an expectation gap between the society and we as audit profession. The society expects that once an audit is done, that audit must be free of fraud. And we as audit profession have always stated that the primary job of the audit is not to detect fraud, but all the things that we have learned in the auditing standards. Now, this is one area which has been prevailing for a long period. If we don't do some research and study and bring out at large as to what can happen, suppose if really we were to do audit which detects fraud, how much time will it take? What will be the cost? And are the companies willing to pay that cost? If the answer is yes, I think then a future things can change. But again, as a profession, if we keep quiet on the subject, a time may come that some other situation will prevail and there will be a real danger for the audit profession. The next type of gap is more important, and that is what we promise that we are doing and what we actually perform. I think this gap is more important, and when we say whether the appointment will change the nature of report, I think this is what it's trying to say. What we notice through the audit, do we really report it properly? If your answer honestly at the back of your mind is yes, I think the topic would not have arisen here. Possibly the answer is not necessarily yes, and therefore we need to discuss the topic. And I think that's the first problem. Looking at this, the audit reports were changed to include key audit areas. I think that's one area which has started in the last 2 or 3 years. Then we have the CARO. If you look at the latest CARO, I think at least 1/3 of the questions are entirely for the banking industry. Number of questions which are answered in the CARO are mainly for the banks, loans taken, etc., etc. But I think the second or third last question in the CARO also expects you to look at 12 months cash flow and say whether the company will be in a position to repay the loans, sorry, not loans, all the payables in the next 12 months or not. So far, we were doing audit of the past 12 months. Now we have to look at the future 12 months, look at the cash projection and report on that. This to me gives me a nature of trends or things which are changing in the future. Whatever we are talking, what are the fundamental reasons for this kind of disparity between what is expected and what is done? Or what we believe as appointments may change the nature of the audit report, etc. I think the first and foremost is audit fees are not necessarily commensurate with the cost and the risk carrying with the audit. Fundamentally, I think that's the reason that the the fees are not commensurate with the nature of work, the time that we spend, and the risk involved in that. What is the solution? One really does not have a solution which is like an easy trick, but maybe this is one area that all of us will have to think of. The next problem is the tendering system. Many of the audits presently go through the tendering system, and whether you like it or not, we have sufficient members amongst our people who quote amounts which are much lesser than the salary that you might be offering to your CA employed in your office. And still firms take the job and do it. Now, whether one likes it or not, if that's the reality, the entire profession suffers on account of that. So I think it's the tendering system which is a problem. The next is the sense of ownership about the accounting and the auditing standards. The accounting standards are meant to be implemented by the management company, and therefore they must have a sense of ownership. Somehow, at least some companies believe that it is the auditor's job to ensure that the accounts are prepared properly. Now, this may sound very odd when I am talking in a conference of CAs, but if you have dealt with audits of middle and small size, you will understand what I'm saying. So the managements and the company must start taking ownership of the accounting standards, because unless they take the ownership, things are not going to change. And what about auditing standards? I think in the morning some reference was made to 34 auditing standards or number of new standards that are coming. Let's try and remember, when was the last time that I really read the auditing standard? Please don't give public answer, because as I said initially, I have the habit of putting some questions for your consideration. Auditing standards are not those which we can understand by reading. We can understand them by workshops, study circles, and practical case studies. So how many regional councils, how many branches, how many study circles hold workshops on the implementation of auditing standard is the real question. I think this is what we need to do. Otherwise, this is always a problem area. And in all this, we keep on saying that the audit should be of a quality nature. Now, what is the quality? Quality is, if one has to define it, mathematically it can be stated as a comparison between performance and expectation. It is not a static figure. The performance may be static, but the expectations keep on changing. When the expectations are more than the performance, we are in a problem area. When the performance is better than the expectation, that means we are in a good area. I think that's how I would look at the quality of a service. Having talked about the report, let me come to the next stage, communication to those charged with governance. I think those of you who are doing large audits will understand that we make presentations to audit committees. Do we have a method of proper communication? Do we completely do it properly? Do we hold a separate meeting between the audit committee and the auditors? And do we point out the areas of concern? I think these are the key areas in audit which are absolutely necessary if you're doing a large size audit. Really speaking, whether large or small, the principles remain the same. Having talked about this, now let me go to all of us as firms or as proprietors or as individuals, we keep on doing audit. If ultimately the quality of reporting has to improve, what are the things that we need to do? And I think the first and foremost is the quality of education and training will have to improve much, much better. Within your own organization, what is the system of training your own people that you follow? I think if you have a good training system, it is really appreciable. But how many of us have got really good training system within the organization? Let's look at it. I think this is one area which needs to improve. There are some firms which keep aggressive growth strategies, but those are not backed by sufficient skills and resources. Now, if you don't back up your aggressive strategy with the skill and resources, this is going to be a problem. How much time we spend on learning and reading, in short, it can be called as intellectual obsolescence. A theoretical idea is that some of us must have passed CA about 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Today morning we heard our president passed, who said that he passed his CA 70 years ago. Now let's keep him aside because he is one of the oldest one here. Tomorrow if the institute says that we have to go for examination again, what could happen? I think that's the worst thought which comes to the mind, and therefore to keep that thought away, how many of us keep on learning what is necessary for us to learn? We talked about startup, we talked about innovation. Within our own practice, what is the innovation? What is the technology that we are using? How many audit tools are we using? I think these are questions that we need to answer to ourselves. How many of us have got good, proper library, and how many of us do the knowledge management system as it is required? If we don't create this system, the quality of audit can never be as to what it should be. I think these are the things which are absolutely necessary for an audit firm to continue to exist in the current society. Now coming to the last part of my subject, a firm is just a collection of individuals. It is not an entity which by itself does something. All of us as individuals are doing actual work. Now what are the skills that we need to possess and what are the skills that we need to develop further? I think the first and foremost is art of listening. Many of us as we become senior keep on believing that I know it, I can do it. But I think that is the last thing to be borne in mind. I must have the ability to listen to the other person, listen to the client, listen to the assistant, listen to my partners, so that I can get the best out of it. Effective communication. Now I'm speaking this out of my experience both working as a director and working as an auditor. In large corporates where I sit as a director, when the auditors come and make presentation, unfortunately some places the presentation is good, but the communication is not as good as it should be. So I think effective communication is absolutely necessary. One other suggestion is an advice or request. Always be either a mentor or a mentee, and if possible, try to be both at the same time. At whatever level of life you are, you can always be still a mentor to somebody else. And you can also be a mentee of somebody else. There is always a lot of learning that we can do from others, and there is a lot of learning that we can pass on to others in the whole process. Honesty and integrity is something which I think all of us have been told. Now that is something which cannot be measured, but that is essential, and without that, really speaking, nothing can happen. So, all this, who will do this? Because many times when we come to conferences, there are lots of good things that we listen. I think they all become enjoyable while listening, but when we move out, what is it that we carry in our mind? I think that's the last thought that I will deal with. Sometimes people feel that those who are talking in the conference talk for the sake of talking, and therefore, I will keep on continuing to do what I like to do, no problem. But if there is something which has hurt your heart, if there is something which you feel you should do it, please take it to your home and start looking at it. Because when we attend a conference, I think the idea is to know something which I need to know, or know something which I do not know. And most of us, if you are in practice, I can only suggest that Peter Drucker, the great management thinker, had made a comment. The business grows only to the extent the top management allows it to grow, because after all, the bottleneck is at the neck of the bottle. Now, many of us in our own organizations must be at the number 1, number 2, or whatever positions. And if we keep on saying that there are bottlenecks, please think of what is the neck of the bottle. So issues, when they point out to others, they become very simple, but I must remember that there are 4 fingers which are coming to me. So I think that's the first and foremost request that I would have. Please think over issues on which you feel your office should improve upon, you should improve upon, you should look at. Try and spend at least 10% of your time on non-income earning activities. Whatever is your area of practice, are you spending 100% of your time on the amount of work that earns income for you? Then that means you are not doing any research and development. Very broad, hard definition. So start spending at least 10% of your time on activities which are not earning income today, but which might be good for tomorrow. And if all of us have to be relevant in the society in which we are living, start spending 5% of time at least for something which is good for somebody else and not for me alone. Because unless and until we are good for the society at large, of which we are a part of that, the society will not tolerate profession beyond a point of time. We must be able to do some social work. Now, what is social work? Each one can define himself. But there must be some time that we allocate to this kind of an area, because without that, things really don't continue to exist. Well, the subject was, will the appointment process change the audit quality? In a way, you must have found out that I have tried to cover everything except to answer the question. Because the question is such that it does not have one solid answer. The answer is in a collective thinking of all that we have done. Provided we increase our capability and do the right things, I think the answer will follow. I can only end up by saying that there are many things which are talked about in conferences, but to sum up in Hindi, सोचो वही जो बेहिचक बोल सको, सोचो वही जो बेहिचक बोल सको, बोलो वही जिसके नीचे हस्ताक्षर कर सको. Try and think that which you can speak easily, and try and speak only that below which you are willing to put signature. Be honest in your communication, be honest in your work, and I'm sure not only the audit quality, but all of us as individuals will also improve much, much better than what we are. Thank you for the patient hearing.